Project organization is crucial to game development. Good organization can turn your project from a complete mess to a work of art. This project is the kind of work you would likely see after a game jam. The code is messy, the files are all over the place, and there's not much consideration for the organization at all. What I like to do is have all of my folders be in Pascal case. My project root will have 3 or 4 folders, usually 4. There's the add-ons folder, which has to be named a particular way to work. Then I have assets, scenes, and modules folders. The assets folder is where all of the asset resources are stored. As a general rule, I like to organize them by where I got them from, which makes it easier to manage my credits and attributions for the game. My first level organization is the kind of asset it is, whether it is a model, a texture, a sound effect, music, etc. Then each of those folders gets a folder for naming what the pack is and who made it. I also like to copy their license and README files into that folder if they're provided. From there, you can organize further within the assets provided. But if it's in an asset pack, usually the creator will create a pretty decent organization structure for you. As a rule, I do not make any scene files or code in this portion of the project. The only exception is when importing a model as a scene, and then that scene can be modified, as long as it can still be considered an asset, meaning that there is no logic or function inherently attached to it. Usually for me, this means adding a light node to any light-emitting objects. For anyone familiar with Unity, think of it like a prefab folder. In fact, if you like, you can organize a separate prefab folder into your file tree. I usually don't, because I tend not to need too many prefabs in this portion of the game. The scenes folder is where all of my scenes go. I usually make the main scene in the root of this folder, and then make subfolders for different scenes that can be grouped. For example, I make a folder for levels, one for menus, another for enemies, and yet another for items. Like with assets, if you need deeper levels of organization, feel free to add it. My rule for the scenes folder is that as little code as possible is to be used in the scenes folders. If more advanced functionality is needed, or there is code that needs to be reused across multiple scenes, then it should be organized into the modules folder. The modules folder is where all of the code goes. The reason it is called modules is because I follow a module approach to development, where each chunk of independent code runs with minimal external dependencies. Since this isn't a programming tutorial, I won't go too deep into the module structure, but basically the code for each unique functionality gets its own folder. Remembering back to the scenes folder, they are allowed to have a little bit of code, but anything too advanced needs to be refactored. That is, moved into the modules folders. The reason behind this is that the scenes can use the code from the modules, but generally should not use code from other scenes. A good practice is to start making the minimal functionality with code in the scenes folder, but once you need a second script, or the script is getting too big, moving it to the modules folder is a good idea. What I like to do in my modules folder is set up conditional compilation. This isn't necessary for a GD script, but using C# or any other compiled language can get really cumbersome after a while. Setting up conditional compilation allows for smaller chunks of code to be compiled individually, instead of compiling the entire project in one go. A lack of conditional compilation is why projects get slower to change code and recompile as the project grows. So it is very important to ensure your modules folders support this compilation model. As of writing, Godot does not have any features to allow for conditional compilation unless you manually set up the necessary files and links using the .NET command line interface, which can get quite tedious. I'm personally planning to develop a small C# add-on that will make this as easy as it is in Unity right now, but I haven't quite made it yet. Once I do, I'll make a tutorial on how to use it and how it works. Be sure to comment down below if you think this add-on could be useful to your projects. So now you might be wondering, hey, that looks like a lot of work. Why don't I just skip organizing? The file doc has a search bar for a reason. And for a smaller game, you might be right. It is definitely a good idea to feel out where and how much organization your project actually needs. If you're spending any more than 10% of your time organizing compared to actually building content, then it might not be worth the bother. For the sake of a game jam, sometimes organization needs to take the backseat so you can get the project done on time. But if you're not in a timed competition, there's no reason to force yourself to work in an unorganized environment. Especially when you consider larger projects and collaboration, it can get very difficult to sift through all of the files and maintain order. And like I said with the modules, having a lot of code will make the project slow to a crawl, because the engine needs to compile the code every time you want to run a test. Think of it like you're a surgeon. You need to have your tools at the ready while you're doing your work. The distraction of constantly needing to search for the right tool will slow you down and can even cause you to make a disastrous mistake. It's a good idea to have your tools well organized and to have someone to help you find them. That is where the search bar comes in. If for some reason your game engine doesn't have a search bar in the file view, first of all, complain to the devs because that is atrocious. Next, open your projects folders in your File Explorer and search from there instead. This combination of organization and search means that you can easily find what you need. Because if you know what kind of asset you need, you can search for the name of the type and get the folder where those are contained. If you have a specific functionality, you can search for it and find it under the modules folder. If it helps, you can even say nurse out loud while searching.
Nurse, 27 cc's of hydromorgaflurbin, please.
This definitely isn't the only way to organize a project, but it is what has worked for me in the past. In fact, what matters most is that you pick just one style and stick to it. Sometimes it helps to make a small file called a style guide in the root of your project. That way, your teammates can refer to it if they are ever unsure on how to structure their part of the project. Feel free to check out the references I linked to in the description to read about other styles people recommend. As with all kinds of organization, it pays off to start organizing early on, rather than needing to completely reorganize an existing project. I would recommend doing one big organization session to kick it off. Then try to keep your files organized as you add them, referring to the style guide when necessary. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something useful, and don't forget to subscribe. And thank you so much to my members on Ko-fi.